on 4, as medical science faces one of its biggest challenges, the fourth in a series of 6 weekly documentaries on AIDS now joins Andrew Moss as he follows up a quest for control.
Look at the camera, please.
AIDS is an international problem. All over the world, governments are trying to decide what to do about it. Sometimes I wonder what price we're going to have to pay, what price we're prepared to pay to control the disease.
Dr. Andrew Moss, like many epidemiologists, is becoming increasingly concerned that the control of AIDS is developing into a political battle.
When you work in AIDS, when you work in the prevention of AIDS and trying to control the spread of the disease, there's a picture that sits in the back of your mind all the time. It's a picture of a barbed wire fence. And on the other side of the fence are the people who have the disease. And you put them there. And I think this picture explains a lot of what goes on in AIDS control. The doctor or the researcher or the public health person or even the politician who's dealing with it says to himself, I'm here to control the spread of the disease. That's what I'm getting paid for. But I'm not going to build that fence. I'm an epidemiologist at the University of California. I grew up in England, but I've lived in San Francisco most of my adult life. I live up on the hill above the Castro, which is the main gay neighborhood in San Francisco. There are about 20,000 homosexual men living around here. I used to be a cancer epidemiologist. I started hearing about AIDS in 1981. I picked it up on my antenna when it first started to be discussed in the professional literature. In those days, it was still thought of as an infectious cancer. Then in 1982, somebody put up some photographs on the window of the local pharmacy. And these were photographs of Kaposi sarcoma lesions on the feet of a gay man. This was a warning for other gay men. It was really the first piece of public health action in AIDS. And I began studying the spread of the disease in the Castro. First study we did was a very simple study. We just wanted to get a rate to find out how prevalent the disease was in gay men. So we went along to the health department and we found out where all the people who had AIDS lived. And we worked out the denominator, how many gay men there were who were susceptible. And there was a very high rate. It was 3 per thousand. A little over 1 in 300 gay men living around here had AIDS when we started doing this work in 1982. But doing that study, I had a very funny sensation that what I was doing when we defined the areas where a lot of gay men lived, I suddenly began to feel that what I was doing was drawing the wall around the ghetto. I was defining the ghetto. And that by doing that, I was exposing the people who lived inside it to a whole lot of other problems besides AIDS. In those days, there was no antibody test, so we didn't know who was infected, and we didn't know how fast the disease was spreading. And a lot of the statements we made then about it's safe to walk through the Castro, you can't eat at a restaurant with a gay waiter, were made sort of with our fingers crossed behind our backs. But one thing we did establish in those early studies was that AIDS was a sexually transmitted disease. And that led us to the hardest thing we had to do, I think, in that early era, which was when we closed the gay bathhouses and sex clubs in 1984.
Today, I have ordered the closure of 14 commercial establishments which promote and profit from the spread of AIDS, a sexually transmitted fatal disease.
I was one of the medical researchers who supported Merv Silverman's closure of the bathhouses, which were basically giant sex clubs.
Close up. The places that I have ordered closed today have continued, in the face of this epidemic, to provide an environment that encourages and facilitates the multiple unsafe sexual contacts which are an important factor in the spread of this deadly disease.
A lot of people protested at the time, and in a way they were right. We were in fact taking away one of their freedoms. And I know that it was a freedom that they considered very important. And I think they were also right in that we were opening a door that could have led to a lot of public hostility against gay men. Now, 3 years later, a lot of the anger has died down. I had the impression that you were listening to us, you were listening to the gay community, you were listening to the mayor, and you were trying to balance the stuff off.
Well, I think you had to. I mean, if this were a casually spread disease, I would have taken the most draconian moves, and civil liberties and civil rights wouldn't have been an issue. I mean, with smallpox, that wasn't an issue. Yeah. Here we had something that was a behavior issue, and to take such a drastic action, which it was seen by many, certainly those who are affected in the gay community, as a drastic action. If it were just to take an action for political reasons, I never could do something like that. I had to be sure that what we were doing was important enough to have an impact, which could have been, as had been predicted, that there would be gay bashing, that gay bars would be closed, that there would be a lot of discrimination against a group.
This is Alan Baruba. He's the historian of the gay bathhouses in San Francisco. He was on the other side at the time. This was one of the most palatial bathhouses in the city. I know it was kind of a landmark in the history of homosexual San Francisco.
This is all the artwork for the advertisements and billboards for the bathhouses that are just left lying about here.
So you feel you're in the ruins of a vanished civilization?
Yes, it's very strange coming back here and seeing this place in the state of an archaeological ruin. You can tell by the columns here, it harkens back to the old Roman bathhouses, and it really had that feeling about it, of a place where men could go and relax and be with each other.
I think it harkens back to the old Hollywood bathhouses.
Right. I miss places like this in the sense that they were refuges. They were like places where you could feel safe, really were safety zones from all of the anti-gay atmosphere out in the streets or where you worked. You could go here and you knew that gay men were going to be here. You weren't going to get arrested. You weren't going to get beat up. You weren't going to lose your job for coming here. But you still feel that the bathhouses were right to be closed.
I thought we had to close them. I didn't think we had any choice. I mean, I think we were in the middle of what we knew was a bad epidemic. And we didn't think that the gay community in general saw it for what it was saw how bad it was. And I think we felt that we just had to, one, give a message that said this is really bad. It's so bad that we have to close down what I know of a lot of people feel is a central institution of the San Francisco gay community. And two, we're going to save some lives. And as I look back, I think we were right. I think that in San Francisco we got control of the epidemic. And I think the bathhouse closing was a part of that. Maybe not the central part, but a part of that. And I'm glad we did it. AIDS is not a San Francisco problem anymore. It's an international problem. It's not just a homosexual problem anymore. It's a general heterosexual problem. But I learned something from closing the bathhouses that I think is very relevant to the debate about control that we're having now. I learned that you have to do what's necessary to stop the epidemic, even if it does take people's rights away. But I also learned that if you're going to take people's rights away, you better really be doing it for a good reason, public health reason. You better figure out how to protect them from the adverse consequences of what you do. AIDS is a venereal disease, and we've dealt with venereal diseases before. In the 30s, syphilis was a very widespread and lethal disease, and the United States took an aggressive approach to dealing with it. It was a nationwide campaign. They went out there and they took the public education and also the testing out to where the disease was, to the people who were infected. In this case, they used mobile health clinics and they took the campaign out to rural Georgia. I think this is great stuff. This is what we need to be doing now.
Find syphilis, bring it to treatment. That is the story of control. The treatment renders the patient non-infectious, stops the spread of the disease through the community.
They had treatment. They had salvarsan, and pretty soon they had penicillin. And when they found someone who was infected, they could treat them, and both cure them and stop them being infectious. We don't have any treatment for AIDS, and that really defines the AIDS problem now in 1988. We've got the test, we can find out who's infected, but we can't make them uninfectious. And that means we draw that red line around them, and we leave them, carrying a very powerful stigma.
The man who has seen the blood test loses his fear. The man who hasn't had one wants it. Everyone talks about it. The blood test becomes a demonstration and a symbol.
And that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers.
Since 1985, the U.S. Army has tested all new recruits. And if you're positive, if you're carrying the AIDS virus, they don't let you in. The Army's always tested for venereal diseases, and in fact it was the military testing in World War I that alerted us to the great spread of syphilis in the 20s. The results of the Army studies were quite alarming. Quite a high proportion of recruits were seropositive, carrying the virus. And this was particularly in the big cities on the east and west coast. Some groups it was 3 and 4%. The results were so high that they changed the whole climate of thinking about AIDS. In my business, public health, the military studies were the thing that caused us to seriously consider whether we might be at the beginning of a heterosexual epidemic of AIDS in the U.S.
Hands to your side, please, swinging to your
And people began talking about extending this kind of testing to a much wider population.
Why don't you spread out now and give yourself some room.
So the question became, how do we do that? Do we have to test everybody, or just groups at high risk? How do we get people to be tested when there's no treatment? Because what we're going to do is stigmatize them. We're going to draw the red line around them and just throw them back. And finally, is the epidemic bad enough that we have to make some people take the test? It's called mandatory testing. The man who did the testing for the military, Major Robert Redfield, is now trying to work out how to make some kind of widespread testing acceptable to the U.S. as a whole. Many people don't have faith in the willingness of government agencies to make sure that if they do take the test, come out positive, then it won't cause them to lose their house, their job, their insurance, their social standing, their friends, their position in the community, and so forth.
Well, I think those concerns are real. I think that we have to effectively deal with them. That in order for us to successfully limit the spread of this virus, I believe that we have to create an environment in society where I want to know if I'm infected because it's in my best medical interest, and I want to know I'm infected because it's in the best interest of the country at large in trying to stop the spread of this deadly virus. And so what we have to do is remove the obstacles to testing. And the major obstacles, as I see to testing right now, really are fear of loss of health insurance. And again, my own position is that's an easy obstacle for us to deal with. How? What we need to really do is pass some form of national health insurance for people infected with the AIDS virus. Not national health insurance for all people in the United States, not national health insurance for people with cancer, but national health insurance for people infected with the AIDS virus. Why AIDS and not cancer? Because AIDS is a national crisis right now that could really change the way we live life in America. And it's a major obstacle to testing and test-linked education as a package is our critical tool to stop this epidemic. And so if knowledge of the infection means accurate education coupled with knowing that you're infected or not is the paramount position we need, but I can't get there because some people are afraid of losing health insurance.
Or their jobs or their houses.
Or their jobs or their houses.
What are we going to do about that?
Then I need to pass the national health insurance, and I need to pass a anti-discrimination legislation, not for gay men, but for people with the AIDS virus. Okay, to basically provide so that there's a framework. Now, I realize that laws...
Redfield, described by one gay newspaper as the embodiment of everything that's evil in the federal government, is a closet liberal. And you're really going to go to this administration and say, we must have national medical care for AIDS victims, and we must have federal anti-discrimination law to protect AIDS victims. Is that right?
There's no question about that. That my goal right now is to really control the AIDS epidemic in the United States. And that's my agenda, and then ultimately in the world.
A lot of people were frightened when Redfield started talking about widespread use of the test, but I must say I find myself agreeing with much of what he says. I think what he's basically talking about is a voluntary testing program, but he wants to pursue it aggressively, and I think that's the right combination. Voluntary means that people only take the test if they want to. Aggressive means you go out and try and sell it to them. We use the test to find out who's infected, but we also use it to monitor the epidemic. And that kind of testing is done anonymously to protect a person's confidentiality. I spent the last year in England working on AIDS.
Oxford, this is Oxford. Train at platform.
Some things are easier in England. There's a National Health Service, and also England's really the home of epidemiology and public health. But there's been a lot of difficulty in England with using anonymous testing to monitor the epidemic. One of the people trying to get this kind of testing done is Sir Richard Dole. Dole is kind of the grandfather of modern epidemiology. He's the man who showed the association between smoking and lung cancer.
Dr. Moss, I presume.
Dr. Dole, I presume.
Yes, do come in. Everybody should have the right to know whether they're infected, and indeed should be encouraged to find out if they're infected. But if they don't want to know, then we should get results that are purely statistical so that we can monitor what's going on and warn the public about whether or not our measures to control the disease are being effective.
I think that's right. But what I see in England is that at the moment you can't even use the test anonymously.
That is true.
You can't even find out what's going on in England at the moment.
Not officially, no, you can't.
Not officially?
No, because if you ask permission to do it, almost certainly the committee says no, you can't do it, and it's not being done except in a few places.
Isn't this remarkable, though, when this is officially the greatest public health threat in the post-war era? We can't even find out what's happening?
I think it's a great tragedy. I think it's, and frankly, I think it's unethical not to do it, because here we've got an opportunity in this country, a better opportunity in this country than in most developed countries, of stopping this epidemic before it really starts killing thousands and tens of thousands of people. But we shan't do it unless people know the hazards and unless we take the necessary steps to stop it.
So, Richard, what's going to happen if the numbers keep going up? What are we going to have to do if the disease keeps on spreading?
I just can't bear to contemplate the situation in which that happens, and I don't believe it will happen in this country, because I believe people are too sensible and they will prevent the disease really spreading throughout the country to that extent. But if there is no stopping it, and it does spread to the extent that the whole population is being infected at the rate that parts of New York City are, 2 or 3% of people being infected, then the measures that one will have to take are really horrifying. And the legislative measures, the contact tracing that you'll have to do by compulsion, it's just too horrible a situation to contemplate. We must stop it now.
Britain's public education campaign on AIDS is probably the best in the world. And that's because you can talk about condoms on TV in Britain, and you can have horrifying billboards like this one up in places where there are a lot of addicts. They've been less good about the use of the test. I think they're worried about drawing that red line around the people who are positive. But I think you have to use the test, in the same way we had to close the bars in San Francisco. And I think if you don't work out an acceptable way of doing it, there are people waiting in the wings with some rather alarming proposals. This is Christopher Monckton. He's a writer and a former Cabinet Office advisor on home and social policy. What Monckton believes in is regular, mandatory testing for everyone, the entire British population. And if you test negative, you get to carry an AIDS-free card.
Yeah, a number of security printing firms have been working on this idea. All the essential data are there. You needn't have all the name and date of birth, but I don't mind carrying all that. And on the back, a thing saying what it's all about, explaining that on the date of the test I was found to be AIDS negative. And
You
that's what it
invoke the name of the World Health Organization.
Well, that's right. If it's going to be an international and authoritative card, then of course it will have to have their acceptance.
Of course, at the moment they wouldn't agree with what you're proposing.
No, they wouldn't. They would be strongly against it on civil liberty grounds. But the purpose behind these cards is that this, first of all, fulfills people's right to know whether they have got the disease or not. Secondly, I think it fulfills the more important right for society in general of having some way personally of containing the disease. I mean, if I wanted to go off and sleep with an attractive lass I met at a party, let us say, I might hesitate at the moment because I don't know where she's been. I don't know whether she's got the AIDS virus, whether through having sexual contact with somebody who was bisexual, or whether somebody who was drug using, or just through some accidental contact. This way I can say, admittedly something of a come-on line if you like, have you got an AIDS-free card? And she would say the same to me, and if we were each able to produce one...
You could then make a rational decision.
Well, exactly. Although it's not a guarantee that one is AIDS-free, for various reasons, it is nonetheless, it gives you a much better chance of being AIDS-free. And
Let me
knowing
back
that
up a
you're
minute
not
and say,
AIDS-free. Yes.
and ask, you said compulsory testing.
Compulsory testing.
Essentially the adult population.
That's right. But voluntary cards.
And how is the compulsory testing enforced?
Right. Very simply, first of all, by the persuasive authority of the law, which is considerable. In other words, if Parliament says everyone shall be tested, then certainly everyone who is AIDS-free and has no particular reason to think that he or she is otherwise than AIDS-free will, if Parliament says so, cheerfully, or reasonably cheerfully, go along for a test. And if one could simply achieve the vast majority of the uninfected population being willing to go and be tested, then enforcement against those who were not willing to be tested could be very mild indeed.
Such a point?
I would think a small fine on each annual occasion would meet the case.
The problem is, if you go to a system which is perceived as coercive, then they lose their incentive to come in. Your machinery is going to prevent the useful machinery from working. And you have to acknowledge that. All you're trying to do is get to the seronegatives.
Well, of course, because those who are now seronegative, if you can keep them seronegative, will not become seropositive and will not then incur the very heavy cost in human
99.9% of the population is seronegative. More than that.
Yes.
Okay, if you get to 99% of the population with your thing,
yes,
and it's the wrong 99%, you will achieve zero.
Suitable? You will be.
Here's another idea aimed at the wrong people. AIDS-free video dating. This is New York, yuppie Manhattan. To get on the date list, you have to pass the test. These people are not going to do anything for the public health, and then they're not claiming to. And Munson's card is a public health measure, and it's not going to work. The very people who are not going to take that test and carry the card are exactly the people that need to. So you're going to put all your resources in the wrong place.
I enjoy going to concerts and that sort of thing. I don't like rock and roll too, and I'm not a half-bad dancer. Half of me is a bad dancer, the other part isn't.
So what else do you like to do? What kind of sports?
Baseball, football, basketball, the basics.
You look like you're rather athletic.
I am. Indoor sports too, let's not forget. That's why I'm here, right?
The people that are coming here, they're not paranoid, they're concerned, very concerned, rightfully so. They have been, for the most part, not been going out at all because it's just not worth it. They don't even know how to begin to dealing with other people in AIDS. So at least here, everybody starts off on the right foot, and they can begin.
Someone who tests positive in your process, what happens to them?
Well, we would, first of all, we only sell 6-month memberships, so it's done after 6 months. We suggest everybody else, go get tested at that time. Hopefully they fell in love within the 6 months and want to be back. If somebody came to us and told us that they were positive, we would certainly refer them to the right people. I mean, I know all these people so that they could have the counseling they need, but they would just be deactivated in an ampersand.
Well, Mitch, it's very good having you come back.
One of the things we do know from the military testing is that heterosexual AIDS is not a yuppie disease. Most of it comes from drug use, and it's a poor people's disease. In fact, a quarter of all the heterosexual AIDS cases in the United States are in one borough of New York, the Bronx, where they've got a lot of poor people. Do people here know about it? Do they know what's happening?
I don't think so. I don't think they really do. I speak with black and Hispanic high school students.
Ernie Drucker is an epidemiologist, and he works on AIDS in the Bronx, mostly on AIDS and drug users. And I like him because he gets angry about it.
They're beginning to know it's related to drug addicts, but they're not drug addicts, and since the message about heterosexual transmission hasn't been made clear, if the water supply of this neighborhood had arsenic in it, there'd be somebody post on every corner, and there'd be trucks with safe water, and they'd take it seriously. It's not taken seriously relative to the risk here.
What is the risk here?
The risk here is very great because there are so many drug addicts. There are neighborhoods such as this in which 10, 15, perhaps 20% of all the men are infected, and we found a rate of over 7% in the women over age 25. We know there's a lot of unprotected sex, that there's sexual activity starting at a young age, that even you wouldn't call promiscuous to have 5 or 6 partners between age 14 and 24. But that's quite sufficient enough to expose every woman almost to the 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 men who might be positive.
Most of the heterosexual AIDS in the United States is in places like this, among poor people, a lot of them black and Latin. And it amazes me that the world doesn't seem to realize it. If you really worry about heterosexual AIDS, and we should, you have to bring the money and the resources and the concern here. So on top of that voluntary and aggressive policy that I talked about, you need one other thing. You need to put the policy in the right place.
The thing they could find to make work around it was to hire a few people to seal it up.
So what is it you want people to do?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is to recognize the magnitude of the problem, and that means taking it much more seriously in this part of the world than we have, letting people know it in their schools, on billboards, on posters and radio, making it the center of attention of the community, because this community is going to be decimated by this disease if it isn't done. It may be anyway. Secondly, we have to begin to treat the people who are sick now and are going to get sick, and we're just barely beginning to prepare for that.
You want to treat them here?
I think we need to treat them in the communities, because where else are they going to go? So, for example, in a neighborhood like this, we have a building that can be renovated and made a place for people who have AIDS and nowhere else to live as a place to live. While you do that, if you had 40 people living in that building, you probably hire 40 or 80 people to take care of them. That can make jobs for people in this community. The unemployment rates in these areas are 50%. And there are plenty of competent people around here. God knows, to get by in a neighborhood like this, you need some skill. And most people aren't criminals. They're people trying to get by in hard circumstances.
A lot of AIDS comes from drug use, and drug use means jail. And when you come out of jail, and you're unemployable, and you're seropositive, and you have nowhere to live, this is where you go. To a homeless shelter run by the city of New York. If you really want to see the underside of American life, you want to look in here. We tried to film inside, but they wouldn't let us.
Okay, this is Franklin Avenue Shelter, an old armory. 800 men living in there, like you saw, in what really is an urban refugee camp. Most of those men have been there about 2 years since the place opened. They live in despicable conditions, 6 inches apart in their cots. And for those men, maybe half of them are drug addicts, and we think about half of them, or 25% of all the men in that place, are probably infected with the AIDS virus.
You wouldn't believe what's happening in here. There are 1,000 men in here, and quite a lot of them are going to die of AIDS quite soon. And the kids on the school up on the hill here, they still don't believe it. They still don't understand what's happening. They don't understand where AIDS is, and they're going to get it. We've heard people talk about the leper houses of the future, where AIDS patients are going to be warehoused. This is it. It's here now. This is a leper house of the future, and it's here right now, right here. Ronald Reagan gave what was really the first presidential speech about AIDS recently in Washington, more or less at your invitation. And he said a lot of things about AIDS prevention that many people, perhaps even you, would consider to be on the wrong side of the issue. As I see it, in the United States, the emphasis is changing towards some sort of mandatory testing, although it's not clear who it is that's supposed to be tested or who's doing the testing.
Unfortunately, that's true. And I think as we move towards 1988, it's going to get much, much worse, and I'm very afraid of that. I'm opposed to mandatory testing. I think it tends to drive the disease, the people with the disease, underground. If our goal is to get numbers, we don't need names. If our goal is to change behavior, then we must encourage people to come in, not cause them to turn away. Even if this were a help from a public health perspective, which it would not be, I mean, it would be insignificant, the costs involved, I mean, you'd have to test everyone every 3 months or so. You'd have to test everyone coming in and out of states, coming in and out of the country. And then once you have those names, if you're going to isolate them, what are you going to do? Take over the city of New York? I mean, if the estimates are true of 1 million, 2 million people in the United States, what are you going to do with these people? And many of them are very young. Many of them may live 5, 10, who knows how many years they'll live. Who's going to pay for it? How are we going to do it? I mean, it is totally impractical, and it is, from a public health perspective, going to have little or no effect. If you put up what I consider to be barriers, and that is that my name is going to go on a list, or I may not get the job, or I won't be allowed to get married, or what have you, I won't come in. And if I don't come in, then you will not have a chance to counsel me. And that's an issue that I don't think it's complex, I think it's very basic. But unfortunately, I think politicians, well-meaning and not so well-meaning, when pressured to do something, tend to do what is visible, a quick fix.
There's a flood of legislative proposals in Washington now for different kinds of AIDS testing. Immigrants, military recruits, and the rather small number of federal prisoners are already tested. Now there are proposals on the books for mandatory testing of prostitutes, hospital workers, drug offenders, VD clinic patients, anyone admitted into hospital, food service workers, and even in Georgia, primary school teachers. Often the proposals seem to be connected with a sense that public health officials have been somehow too easy on gay men. One of the congressmen most active in proposing legislation is William Dannemeyer of Orange County in Southern California, the conservative heartland of the United States.
Hello,
my name is Andrew Moss. I'm here to see Congressman Dannemeyer.
Okay, if you'd just like to take a seat and he'll be right with you.
Thank you. I'm from San Francisco, the liberal heartland. I'm pretty sure that Congressman Dannemeyer thinks that I'm on the wrong side.
In America today, if you have a curable communicable venereal disease, such as syphilis or gonorrhea, a doctor is required to report that to public health authorities in confidence because it's nobody else's business. But if he encounters a non-curable communicable venereal disease, such as the virus for AIDS, he's not required to report it. And this has gotten so crazy that in my state of California, if the doctor reports it, he commits a crime. Now that's ridiculous. The law should not be enforced based on the sexual orientation of the group that's affected. 52% of the cases in America are in 3 cities, New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And when you get into the politics of the issue, you reflect on the fact that it's difficult to get elected in any of those 3 cities in America today unless you make your peace with the male homosexual community. And I think the health officials, the public health officers of those 3 cities are reflecting that bias in the approach they have pursued in controlling this epidemic. And it's a tragedy because they don't know better. They have their fannies kicked, quite frankly, because they have permitted those of the male homosexual community to determine what should be public health policy.
And you're advocating mandatory testing for a list of groups of people.
If you fit into the group to be tested, I don't think, in my opinion, you should have the option of opting out and decline to be tested. If you are tested, if you fit in the group like a hospital admittee between 15 and 49, I think those people should be routinely tested. We test their blood for I don't know how many other things. There's no problem. There's no inconvenience to the patient to have the blood tested for the antigen, with the antigen for AIDS to determine the presence of the antibody.
But your proposals are considerably wider than that.
It includes persons convicted of prostitution, persons convicted of drug abuse, prisoners, persons applying for marriage license, immigrants. These groups of people, I think, in our society and dealing with public health, we should be testing them.
You're also proposing mandatory contact tracing for infected people.
Yeah.
Now, the people who do contact tracing in syphilis say you can only do it with the cooperation of the infected person. But you can't make people give you the name of their sexual partners.
Well, we have a very interesting way that, aside from the issue of AIDS and the virus that we have used in contact tracing for sexually transmitted diseases such as syphilis and gonorrhea, we say to a person who has a disease, friend, if you choose not to divulge your sexual contacts, we'll quarantine you. And we have an effective way of getting their attention.
Not done for syphilis. Absolutely not done for syphilis in this country.
I disagree. That practice is followed in the city of San Diego. I have personal knowledge of it because I had contact.
When did they last quarantine a syphilis case?
I don't think they quarantined them.
That's what I'm saying.
But they used the threat of it as a means of getting the person's attention.
The debate is going on in Washington right now about the antibody test and how you use it. It's a very important debate. It's really the first national political debate about the AIDS epidemic in the United States. Congressman Dannemeyer seems to me to take a somewhat extreme view in this debate. He wants to take the test and surround it with penalties. You must take the test or else. Major Redfield, also in Washington, seems to take a different view. He thinks the AIDS epidemic is different from other sexually transmitted diseases, and he thinks we have to go into the political process and lobby for protection for the people who we want to come and take the test. I think that the debate is going to end up closer to Major Redfield's position than Congressman Dannemeyer's, at least as they are at the moment. I certainly hope so. The way you protect people against the adverse consequences of the test is you pass legislation. New York City already has some protective legislation. Its Human Rights Commission outlaws discrimination against people with AIDS or against people who are seropositive. Richard, you're a hairdresser, and you worked until recently in this store?
In this, Coiffure Aesthetica, the place is called.
And what happened to you?
I told them that I had AIDS, and the next day I was fired.
Just like that?
Right. I can tell you my side of the story.
Right. Richard Drago says that you fired him because he had AIDS.
That's not true. First of all, it was nothing to talk about AIDS. We never knew that he had AIDS, and it was never a question raised about that. So what I told Richard is just to...
called you.
It's not true. It's not true. I opened this business on the Christopher Street, which everybody knows this is like a mostly gay street. And we take in customers, anybody who ever come to this store. And we never know whether this customer has AIDS or he doesn't have AIDS.
You never said to me...
We never asked this person
what's
whenever
the sense
he
of building
comes,
you up when we're going to have to build someone else up instead?
I'm not
Did you ever say
your
that?
question.
Did you ever say that to me?
I even don't know what you answered.
Did you say to me, what's the sense of building you up, being that you have AIDS, and we have to hire someone else instead?
That's not true. That's not true. I never said that.
Did you ever say to me?
You're very arrogant and conceited
Did you ever say to me, go get a letter from a doctor saying that you're not contagious?
That's not true. Whoever we hire,
we'll find out in court.
By law, it's required that whoever we hire, then this person has to have a medical examination. You know.
My license says that I am free of anything, no contagious diseases.
That's how show me your
that's
license.
how you've seen my license.
No,
you wouldn't hire someone without a license.
I don't know, Richard, what I did to you.
My license
was
quite
hanging
well
up there. That this business, when business
started.
is open, when somebody open the business, it's like a baby. It's giving birth to a baby. And when people, work very hard for the money and to do something, and there's somebody like this who never worked. I came here, I have 3 children, I don't have no husband, I have these children to support. Not true.
You think you could come on a gay neighborhood on Christopher Street and fire someone who has AIDS and get away with it?
Somebody who has
you won't hire someone who has AIDS. You just said it.
I didn't say anything.
Go ahead.
I didn't say
hit me.
I didn't hit you.
You want to?
Go
ahead.
It's okay.
Come on.
Thank you very much.
This is Greenwich Village, and a lot of people have AIDS here. And in New York City, a lot of people are losing their houses or their jobs because of the fear of AIDS. I don't know what happened in this situation. I don't know what the rights and wrongs are. Richard Drago says he feels as if he's been pushed outside the civic family. I can understand that. The New York City Human Rights Commission is trying to keep people with AIDS and people who are seropositive inside the civic family here in New York City. And I think they're right about that. But it's going to be very difficult. And if it's this difficult here in Greenwich Village, how difficult is it going to be in the rest of the country and the rest of the world? Right now, the United States is considering tough legislation on mandatory testing for AIDS. Here in Bavaria, they're actually passing such legislation. There's mandatory testing for prostitutes and for immigrants seeking residence. A move to test all state employees was beaten back. But the thing in Bavaria that worries people most, it worries me, is a catch-all provision that seems to say that anyone suspected of being infected can be taken in by the police and tested for the virus. The man behind the legislation is Peter Gauweiler, the Minister of the Interior. Gauweiler is the political protege of Franz Joseph Strauss, the conservative overlord of Bavaria. Gauweiler is a fast-rising politician himself.
Wir wollen kein neues moralisches Klima, aber wir glauben, dass durch die Art und Weise, wie in den 70er Jahren nichts dagegen unternommen worden ist, dass zum Beispiel die Liberalisierung, die zu Recht im Verhältnis der Geschlechter zueinander entstanden ist, fast ausschließlich den Geschäftemachern der Pornografie in die Hände gearbeitet hat. Dass nichts unternommen worden ist, dass die Drogensucht, die Heroinsucht sich wie eine eigene Seuche über die Länder Europas verbreitet hat. Wir glauben, dass wir mit diesen ganzen Verhältnissen ein Biotop geschaffen haben, das dem Virus ideale Verbreitungsbedingungen erst gegeben hat. Und das wollen wir mit Sicherheit auch ändern.
Some of your critics say that you are using AIDS to become one of the most talked about politicians in Germany today.
Einige Ihrer Kritiker sagen, Sie verwenden AIDS dazu, einer der Politiker zu werden in Deutschland heute, über die man am meisten spricht.
Quatsch.
That's nonsense.
Rubbish.
Rubbish. One critic in particular, Herr Heinemann in Nordrhein-Westfalen, described your AIDS policy as AIDS politics running amok.
Einer Ihrer Kritiker, Herr Heinemann in Nordrhein-Westfalen, beschrieb Ihre AIDS-Politik als gesundheitspolitischen Amoklauf.
Ich glaube, es ist ein gesundheitspolitischer Amoklauf, wenn die Behörden nichts unternehmen, dass zum Beispiel männliche und weibliche Prostituierte, die AIDS infiziert sind, jeden Tag und jede Nacht die Epidemie weiter verbreiten vor den Augen der Behörden, die um die lebensgefährliche Infektiosität dieser Menschen wissen. Das ist ein Amoklauf.
Gauweiler is kind of tightly wired, as we would say in California. But I had the sense that much of what was going on in Bavaria was for show. What they're proudest of is the compulsory testing of the state-regulated prostitutes in Munich. And the police were very happy to show me how all the prostitutes' health cards were checked.
Da haben wir einen Reisepass.
Nicht so geht. So, jetzt am Sessel. Wie lange sind Sie schon da?
Schön, heute den ersten Tag.
Gut, sage ich. Gesundheitsamt, ist auch in Ordnung.
Are the girls here worried about AIDS?
Yes, they know about AIDS, but I think the problem is not so much on the streets in Munich than in the clubs.
Why in the clubs?
The girls get more money, and so there are nearly forced to give more. And if you give them enough, they work without rubber and do things you shouldn't do in these times.
Do you think that the city that is realistic in trying to reach the people that are at risk for AIDS?
No. I think that is the problem. The politicians only talk to each other. And they tell through the newspapers, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, and we do that. But you should talk to every group, to the homosexuals, to the streetwalkers, I don't know the right word, to the people that they use drugs, but they don't do that.
As Monica points out herself, prostitutes aren't really the problem in Munich, especially the state-regulated prostitutes. The problem is downtown, with drug users and amongst gay men, as it is everywhere else. And here there's a very different climate. Homosexual men in particular seem to fear that their names and their test results we're going to end up on what they call pink lists, and that the general idea of the lists is that those who are on them should disappear from Bavaria. Frank Goebel is a medical researcher in Munich, and he, like me, does studies of AIDS infection in homosexual men. That means he has lists of names and test results.
Now, they agreed to give their data, personal data, for those studies. And of course, with the understanding these data will not be given away. And now we might get a law that those data collected, we are forced to give these data, let's say, to any kind of institution, even worse, maybe to the police. What are we going to do about that?
What are you going to do about it?
I'm afraid I don't find those data anymore.
Yeah. So that's what you're going to do about that, not find your data?
I'm afraid so. I think these measures and the discussion about them destroyed the trust and the confidence that we, the doctors, will keep all those data confidentially. I can't recall another disease or any kind of circumstances where the police is called in to draw some data about the health of anybody.
You don't want to work with the police as your colleagues?
Oh, certainly not. I would like to pick my colleagues myself.
Life is different at the sharp end of the legislation. Talking to people who really are at risk for AIDS, or perhaps just at risk for being on a list, has a different feeling. The cafe was sunny, but I found the conversation rather sobering. Can you tell me what life is like in the gay community here since these measures?
Yes, I would say that Munich is a fighting city. I think the intention of the Bavarian government is to destroy the gay subculture. Because gayness is against nature and something like that. And the Minister of Culture in Bavaria, Mr. Zerdmeier, said that people like that has to be thinned out.
Thinned out?
Thinned out.
And you think this
and that's a language we know from the 30s, you know.
Oh, I must play a double life.
This man's a nurse.
I have to say I have a girlfriend, and I can't say I'm gay because when they know it, it's very difficult with my patients or with my colleagues.
Yeah.
They are all afraid. Every gay man has AIDS, or every gay man can get AIDS.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I moved to Munich or Bavaria. In October this year, I'm leaving. Yes, I'm leaving. I moved to Stuttgart. I've got a new job there. The reason further is I can't get now in a gay bar without afraid, because I don't know if there comes police and controlled us and what happened with my name. I know people that are going out of Bavaria. Myself, I'm knowing 30 people, and I heard...
you know 30 people who are leaving Bavaria?
They're leaving Bavaria.
Since the new measures?
Since the new measures in Bavaria. And I know that from other counseling centers too. They are leaving Bavaria.
Does this make you frightened? That the police know you?
No, that's not frightened. But what can I make?
What can you do?
Yeah.
Nothing you can do about it. This man's an IV drug user who's tested positive.
So of course they made the test in jail, and they know me, you know. And now, what can I do? I can go out of Bavaria, okay. But when I go out of Bavaria, then they look for my address and tell the other ones that I be positive.
I wanted to ask you how real this barbed wire is.
Some of our politicians brought the argument that it's too expensive to have all those patients in the hospitals. We need special houses. Now the question is, what is the difference between a special house and a concentration camp? That's the big question.
You don't have much faith in the government of Bavaria?
No, not at all.
10 miles from Munich is the concentration camp memorial at Dachau. Dachau was the first of the concentration camps and the model for all the others. They keep this here for a reason, and I guess I feel the reason is rather complicated. Part of the reason is that during the Third Reich, 50,000 homosexual men went to jail, half of them to the concentration camps. In the camps, they worked them to death. I think that AIDS has turned into a sort of moral test in many Western societies. On the one hand, infectious disease epidemics have traditionally overridden the Western individual liberties. But AIDS is an infectious disease of people who perhaps don't quite have the Western individual liberties. It's very easy to scapegoat homosexual men and junkies. The other side of the picture is that you can frighten yourself into inactivity. I find myself saying to the people in my business, AIDS prevention and control, that if you don't want to see coercive methods used in the AIDS epidemic, if you don't want the barbed wire, then you have a responsibility to design voluntary methods. If you don't want to see coercive methods used in AIDS, you have a kind of moral responsibility to design voluntary methods to stop the spread of the epidemic, which work.
There's a guide with information on the state of our knowledge and how the problem's being tackled. For a copy, just send a large stamped addressed envelope to AIDS Now, P.O. Box 4000, London W3 6XJ, Glasgow G12 9JQ, or Belfast BT2 7FE. And if you'd like to speak to the National AIDS Helpline, the number is 0800 567 123. It's free and confidential, and there may also be a local AIDS helpline listed in your phone book.